Thank you for being here. I'd like to call this meeting to order.
This meeting will be conducted by audio and video conference without a physically present quorum of the Rock Island City Council due to the disaster declaration issued by Governor Pritzker. Because of this order related to COVID-19 health concerns affecting the state and the city, the mayor has determined that an in-person meeting at City Hall with all participants may not be practical or prudent. Alderpersons and staff may not all be physically present at City Hall due to the disaster, and physical attendance at City Hall may be limited. To participate remotely during the public comment or public hearing portion of the meeting, please join by phone at 1-224-475-1979, PIN 460-626-783, #.
Thank you very much. Roll call.
Alderperson Robinson. Absent. Hurt.
Here.
Present.
Swanson. Absent. Parker.
Here.
Poulos.
Here.
Healy.
Here.
Mayor Toms.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Public comment. Is anybody out in the audience here for public comment? Not yet, Chris, you're fine? Yeah, just, it's a sign. I'd imagine nobody signed. Anybody virtual? Nobody? Tim saying nobody's there. So we shall move on. Now, Mr. Ailes, and we can start this discussion. If people want to ask, I don't know if we want to start by using questions or if you want to make a statement, either way, but.
We can jump right in if you have questions. If you don't, I guess I'll think of something to say.
Yeah, here you go.
I think I'd rather you speak because not everybody here that is here today was at the first walkthrough across the river. So maybe you can start out with your plan and so everybody's up to speed.
Okay. I'm here on behalf of a development team that includes myself and Jim Bergman, who is a co-developer of mine on the Call building across the river. And then a third partner, Brian Fritz, who owns Pioneer Property Management. And he would manage this project for us as well as others that we have completed. The three of us have been working on this project for the better part of a year, I would guess. I think one of the first steps, Dick Davidson is my attorney. He's also Mark Romer's attorney. And so knowing and understanding that Mark owns the building and he had a partner, Dick worked with Mark, and I believe they have Mark's partner out of the deal. Mark now owns the building himself, or has control of the building. And we are working with him on the project to acquire the building from him. He would not be a member or an owner of the project as we proceed forward. The financing for the project that we would look at includes a layering of funds, starting with the Affordable Housing Tax Credit awarded through IDA. We'd be looking at a 4% non-competitive application. That's the catalyst that would allow us to do this. On top of that, we would layer that with some ARPA funds from IDA, conventional financing from a bank, our private equity, and then federal and state historic tax credits. With all of those funds and the budget that we've put together, we have a gap in about a $16.7 million project. There's about $1 million gap, and we're asking the city for assistance with that, matching the $1 million that we would be putting in. That can come in any number of ways, and that's one of the things I guess that we're here to talk about, whether that be in the form of TIF, some ARPA money from the city, some enterprise zone benefits from the city. I understand there's a low interest loan that might be available since we're in a qualified census tract. Suspect that we won't get there with any one source, but if we can patch it together, that keeps us moving. The timing is critical. The state historic tax credit has a competitive application. There's one that's being accepted in February that we won't make. And then there's a second one this year before the state historic tax credit program sunsets and goes away. It may be reinstated, it may not. So we don't want to take that chance. We're here trying to make this work with the one last shot we'll have at the historic tax credit funds. The structure that we're proposing would have the Mark transfer the building to the city. That's important for a
Mark
couple.
Romer.
Mark Romer, thank you. That's important for a couple of reasons. One, we're hopeful that with the city owning the building, you might have a little more of an ability to help us put together a package that addresses some parking needs. And at the same time, an ancillary benefit is that if the city owns the building for 6 months and then transfers it to us, that gives us an up or an edge in the scoring for the state historic tax credit that we would plan to submit this fall. Timing, I suspect that we'd have all of the applications in by the end of this year. Our funds would be in place. Construction would probably follow in 2024, better part of a year, and then stabilization in 2025. I believe there are about 44 apartments, if I have my math right. The rents that we would be proposing would be at $625 and $775, if I read my numbers right. The affordable housing tax credit carries with it a requirement that the project would be subject to income restrictions. All the residents would be subject to a restriction of 60% of the area median income, and then those rents fall within that program. We've talked about the use on the first floor during our walkthrough. The back section that really has no windows, we would make use of that for storage for each of the residents, having an on-site storage bay. There'd be a community center for our residents and the potential for a community service facility that could benefit the community. We have worked with our architects, our engineers, and the city's building department as well as the fire department in addressing issues that we've identified as we walk through the building that for one reason or another need to be addressed, whether it be a code issue or a life safety issue or a historic issue. Does that help get things started?
Yeah, Chris, can I start a couple questions here for you? So you broke down the different financing sources, and I mean, obviously you must have some figures, anticipated figures for you to come up with this $1 million, gap that we're talking. Could you break down what you're expecting from each of those funding sources?
$6.6 million in the affordable housing tax credit, $3.8 million in the federal and state historic credit, $2.7 million with the IDA ARPA funds, $1.6 million in permanent bank financing, $1 million from the development team, and the $1 million gap that we're looking to fill. That should total 16.7.
What was the second one you stated again? I'm sorry.
Historic tax credits of 3.8.
3.8, okay, thank you.
Is your acquisition of the property dependent upon approval of all those different credits?
Yes.
Could you go in a little bit farther? You talk about the city having ownership of the building, and I know that there's a $4.5 or $5 million mortgage or lien on the building now, mortgage on the building. Could you walk through what potentially could, the steps that, how that would be structured? I know it could change due to legalities, but.
Yes, I'd have to defer ultimate answers to both the attorneys for the city and the bank and their attorneys. But the thought process of the hour is that the building would be transferred to the city, subject to the existing debt. And there would be an agreement whereby our development team would acquire the building and assume that debt after all the funding's in place.
So if we assume it, we're not taking on that liability of that $4.5 million.
Correct.
You would be taking that on. Who would be taking on that $4.5 million?
Yes, we would. It would, when the building is transferred to the city,
Yes.
the debt would continue to be secured by the building,
Yes.
but you would not assume liability as
And the
the city.
payments of those mortgage payments or whatever it be, the developer making those payments and keeping current with that.
That, either the developer or Mr. Romer will work that out.
Somebody besides the city would be
Correct.
making those.
Correct.
And be liable for that. But the lien and the building would be the collateral still as it speaks.
Correct.
Okay.
What about the liability of the building when we own it? Liability of the building for workers or anybody that's around that building, that would be on our shoulders then?
Certainly, certainly, if you're the owner of a building, you're gonna need insurance that's gonna cover for people who might be trespassers or passersby or visitors or, folks like us walking through tonight, right? With regard to work comp, I'm sure that the folks that have the project, that they're working the project, I would assume have work comp, and I mean, that would be part of the, that'd be part of the deal. They would have to have work comp coverage for the people working there. But there would be a separate, in my opinion, liability issue. If you're the owner, you have the obligation of, if something, something's structurally wrong and, a chunk of it falls off and crushes somebody's car or something, yeah, you'd have some potential
But
liability.
let me just ask this. I don't think that there's gonna be any work being done on the building while we own it.
That is correct.
Is there water onto the building?
I can't answer that right now.
Not on, the water's not on
I
right
wouldn't
now.
think so because it's so cold in there.
So we would take property of a building that doesn't have a sprinkler system and could,
No electricity, there's no electricity, no water.
well, someone could go start a fire in on it and burn it down.
Let's get a lot of
I'm breaking out
insurance.
worst-case scenarios.
Fair enough. I would
Yeah.
defer to our attorney
Oh, I understand.
and your attorney,
Yep,
and we can
absolutely.
work out whatever kind of language that you would feel comfortable with as far as an indemnification.
Okay. That's what I was getting to.
Yep.
I assume so.
So just to bring everyone else again up to speed on some of this, I don't know if this is a 30-year
Correct.
proposition or a 30-year agreement or whatever.
Yeah, the
you wanna call
affordable
it.
housing tax credit carries with it a 30-year hook whereby these income restrictions are in place for 30 years. And at the end of 30 years, then it would come out of the program and be eligible for market rate housing.
And real quick, on the average median income, that's 60%, and goes, is that calculated, is that Rock Island County, is it the Quad Cities, where does that number come from?
It's the metro area. So
Iowa and Illinois?
Davenport, Moline, Rock Island Metro.
What is that number?
It's like
Single
38,000.
person,
5,000
35,000.
for one person household.
It's 35.8, and then I think for two, it's 40,980.
Thank you.
We'll see if Terry gets the same answer.
And so to get it correct, someone cannot make more than that, correct?
That
And
is
live in
correct.
that?
That is
Okay.
correct.
Is there sometimes they talk about adjusted gross income,
It's
No.
this income limit is published and adjusted annually.
adjusted annually, okay. Okay,
So, and I'm not sure who's best to maybe this
Yeah.
would be more towards our city staff. Do we have any numbers of percentage of residents in the downtown area that are, I don't know, what do you wanna call it?
low to moderate income,
Income qualified.
income qualified?
That's the word I was looking for, yeah.
The foam thing's gone. Anybody notice that? Huh,
Here, you can borrow mine.
and I think I'll be good. Those numbers are always tied to census tracts, and the census tracts do not necessarily, is it down there? Well, there we go. Hold on. I'm sure it makes all the difference. It's tied to census tracts, right? And so we don't have a census tract that perfectly covers the downtown geography. So an imperfect measure would be to go off of the census tracts. But a specific number for the census tract that covers most of the downtown, and I'm sure Tara's probably pulling that up now. But basically, most of our census tracts are low to moderate income census tracts, where per HUD's standard, at least 51% of residents are at 80% of area median income or less. So one of the things that can sometimes be a bit of a struggle around this is that the state and the feds for different programs are using slightly different numbers. So some things are set at 60, some are at 50, some are at 40, some are at 30. But we can pull those numbers and try to get as close as an answer to that question as possible.
So, how many buildings do we have already existing in downtown Rock Island that are income-based, low to moderate income, whatever category's been slapped on them, and how many units does that represent?
I can try to pull that number together, though in an email a few hours ago to the council, we did include for your review a housing study from earlier last year, and it does list out those known properties. I don't believe it includes numbers of units.
It doesn't
though.
include Spencer Towers, which, that's under Community Home Partners. I don't know if they have any other smaller properties. I believe Project Now has a couple of residential properties, too.
In the downtown?
Yeah. They have commercial property and residential, I think.
What complicates it a little bit is that a number of them that Rock Island Economic Growth has been doing is got mixed income. And so some of it's 60%, some of it's 80, some of it's 100. And so, just because the building itself
No,
has
I
some in
know,
there.
that's in there, but there are very few that have mixed with market rate.
I know 3 buildings right now, but yeah.
You know, and the only
That haven't.
market rate that Growth or Dari or whoever has is McKesson Lofts.
No, that's not the only one. The one that,
Oh, Coleman.
right next to Coleman's, Florist there, that built that high rise, it used to be Mosenfelder's back, way
Oh,
back then.
above Coleman's, there's 2 condominiums that are market
No, but the
rate.
whole building, where across from
Oh,
Holiday Inn.
Clipper. No?
Nope, the other direction, where Dari is, where Dari's home office is,
Yeah?
where Stacy, that one, the Renaissance, is that called Renaissance?
Yes.
That building is mixed, and so is the one above Icons.
Well,
At least those 2. I don't think Solid Flats is, but I'm not sure about Solid Flats, but I know those 2 are.
And then there are plenty of other smaller, privately held apartment units or condos throughout the downtown in buildings where there might be only 1 or 2 units. The unit I live in is technically a market rate unit in a building with 6 apartments in it. My rent, I'll just say, for a 1-bedroom unit is $700. And that's not receiving any special assistance or tax credit program.
Above La Figueroa's is another one.
Above La Figueroa's
By
is
Leo's
another.
Shoe Report, a pair with Stearns deal above there, or
Correct.
market rate.
Correct.
There's 3 or 4 up there, or whatever it is.
So the challenge here for staff is just that there's a lot of different types of housing using a lot of different types of programs to make their projects happen. So it's hard to draw full-on apple-and-apple comparisons across the downtown housing market.
What has the steering committee and the downtown group said about this project?
So they are the group that kind of we worked with as staff to do that assessment that was sent out earlier, so they could have a better understanding of the mix of income. Their views, I think, similar perhaps to the council and for the CED team, are mixed. There are pros and cons to all of these different developments, and their full impact on the downtown long-term is a little hard to determine. Again, kind of where the CED department stands, I think is pretty similar to where that group stands, which is when looking at the universe of options available, the least desirable option is for a 6-story building to remain vacant, blighted, and underperforming in the downtown. And any alternative which helps to put it into productive use is a good option to consider seriously. We also know from that assessment that there is a large amount of demand for both affordable and market rate units. Our vacancy rate, which a healthy vacancy rate is about 5%, ours is like 2%. So there's clearly a lot of room for more units in the downtown of all stripes.
Could I ask Chris to come up again? So, I'm gonna go back to the numbers of the financing numbers that you gave us just a few minutes ago. So, are these concrete figures or are these estimated numbers, like the historic tax credits? Do you know that that's a rock solid number, same as for the affordable housing? Are these rock solid numbers? Are these estimated numbers?
I've been doing this for probably 20 years.
Okay.
And the process is that we follow the rules for the different agencies. The LIHTC program, there's a formula. We follow the formula, and we're entitled to this much in credits.
Okay.
The historic tax credits, again, you have what's called a qualified rehab expenditure. Not all of your construction costs are going to be QREs, but we've got a pretty good track record of knowing what our QREs as a percentage of the total construction are going to be, and therefore knowing what the historic tax credit will be. Same thing with the ARPA funds, and again, bank financing, just working backwards. You know what your rents are going to be, we know what our operating expenses are going to be, and so here's the debt service that we can support. So are they rock solid? No, but they're pretty solid.
So, as we all know, what anybody that's does any kind of construction work, I mean, you have a number that's set out for what you anticipate being the cost, and so my question would be, so what if that number fluctuates to a much higher number and you find there's deeper issues? Where is that funding going to come from?
First, we have a contingency built into our budget. As we talked about when we walk through the building, we know there are a lot of unforeseen conditions that we're going to come across. If we exhaust that, then that falls on the developer. We will, as part of our affordable housing tax credit closing with the investor who buys those tax credits, we will have to make that guarantee as our development team.
So, I guess, let's just kind of switch over to your ask of the city. So you're asking the city for $1 million, and then, so based on what you told us, conventional financing was 1.6 million, correct?
Correct?
Did the bank, did they not approve the total project, the remainder? Or I guess I'm trying to figure out why we're coming to the city for the $1 million. If there was other options available through conventional financing. I
Well,
mean,
the other that's a good point. The other option that we have, first of all, the project will not support more than $1.6 million of conventional debt.
Okay.
When you use the affordable housing tax credit, which is a real catalyst for this program, you have income restrictions, and we know what our operating costs will be, and so you can work backwards after 20 years of experience and know how much debt that you can support. We do have other options. We don't like them, and that's why we're here asking for the city. It's a public-private partnership with the state, us, and hopefully the city. One of those options is there's a nonprofit group that we work with called the Call to Action, and they could provide funding for us, but one of the hooks for their funding is that we'd have to skew additional units at 30% and 40% of the area median income instead of 60% of the area median income. And that's something we'd prefer not to do.
Okay.
Why didn't you go down the path of making this market rate?
We can't make those numbers work.
Part of, just to put it in context, I think what we're looking for from the council is just whether or not conceptually you would support moving forward with doing all the work we need to do to answer some of these more detailed questions. We would want to spend a lot of time on the agreement for acquiring the building, to mitigate our risk, to make sure we were comfortable with that. We would still need to work with Mr. Ailes to look at his numbers, to flesh that out, why he needs to, get the $1 million, and provide some backup for that. So we really don't want the council to make a decision related to either one of those things tonight based on the information we have, because there's still a lot of due diligence to do between the parties. But kind of the question we're looking for at this point is whether or not you conceptually think the project's worth the staff putting in that time and effort to move forward with that analysis.
No, we understand what's going on, but I think as a council, hey, let's just face it, we've been
Chastised.
we've been down a road of, been given and this is nothing against you, and I'm not referring to you, so don't take this wrong, but we've been given sales pitches before that did not pan out as we thought. I do think that you have a good project as far as, and you're very knowledgeable in what's going on, but of course, as the council, we like to know, where our $1 million is, how, and then I think also, and in my opinion, I think we need to decide, what percentage of market rate housing and, and lower income or whatever you want to call it, you know, how that's, you know, I guess what we want in the city. So it's not, you know, we understand what you're saying, but those are just kind of, at least for me anyway, those are questions I have, and so this is why I'd like to know those numbers and things, so.
And I'm just looking at, I have concerns on the city holding the property. That's part of,
6 months, though.
a lot can happen in 6 months. You know, I have a time concern with approving the $1 million. You know, we're on a short time frame there. Another $1 million into this project, when there's already been money spent there. And, you know, being a non-market rate property, when we do have a lot of money to invest in the downtown, I would love a project like this down there. You know, we have $7.2 million to spend down there, but it's a one-shot deal, and we have to get this right, and I think we just need to verify if this is the right project or not. That's all I want.
And where do we get the $1 million?
And
Well, they-
that was my other question, you know?
Which could be, which we've done a lot of development agreements of tax rebates, property tax rebates. And so that's part of the analysis
Absolutely.
that staff would be doing, is working with the townships or the county of what the assessment value is going to be, to know and what kind of taxes will be assessed on it, and how much that we could offer as a rebate, because the rebates are bankable. And so that works for this development if we wish to do a rebate over whatever period of time it is, if it's 5 years, 10 years, and whether we just use just cities' property tax, or do we ask the school district or the county to also help or not? That's the due diligence that I think Todd's talking about also, is to be able to spend some time talking to different entities and understanding those numbers. But that's where probably the good chance the money would come from, is a property tax rebate.
And we would structure a development agreement that if there was no project, there'd be no money. So I know in the past, I think the city spent some money and not received the benefit of it. And
To clarify, we're not asking for these funds upfront.
Right.
And to your point, yes, we would be finished, and then whatever source that you choose to pull these funds from, we would be entitled to them if we do what we say we're going to do.
Absolutely. Well, and I have the other thing, I mean, haven't been on council obviously as long as everyone, but I've probably had 6 or 7 people, hey, how can I get this amount of money? I want to bring my business to Rock Island. Hey, can you get me, or I would get me money to do that? How does that look to those people who, you know, I can't say, hey, here's $200,000, you know, I don't have the availability to do that, let alone in a month and a half.
So, yeah, so I have a couple questions. So of the 44 units, how many are one-bedroom, two-bedroom, three-bedroom? Do you know?
15 one-bedroom, 29 two-bedroom, and I think there may be a couple of three-bedrooms instead of two-bedrooms.
First one we looked at, I think it was a 3-bedroom.
That's why I say there are a few three-bedrooms in there. So 29 two- and three-bedrooms, 15 one-bedrooms.
Yeah, I saw at least 2, 3 bedrooms. Okay, so what happens if, hypothetically, the city went ahead and we take, the property gets transferred to us, and then during that 6 months' time, you're applying for all these tax credits and everything? And what happens at the end of 6 months if you don't get all your financing package? Then what does the city do?
I don't have my two partners here with me today, so I've got to be a little careful about what I say. But I believe that working with our attorney and your attorney, we can work through language that will get you comfortable in that regard.
Whether it goes back to him,
Or-
or them,
or-
or Romer,
or-
or whoever it is. And
And one of the reasons that we're looking to use, back to take a couple of these comments and bring them together, we looked at the building, and I think you can see, having walked through it today, there's been a lot of money spent on that building. And we worked with Mr. Romer and got him to spend about another $1 million recently to get the windows in, so the building stabilized, so that it doesn't deteriorate or continue to deteriorate as fast as it was. Looking at what's there, I can't envision that building being used for anything other than housing. We can't make it work, and I would think if anybody else could make it work as market rate housing, they would have done so by now. We can make it work tapping, without money from the city, tapping this call to action source of funds. But we don't think that's the right thing to do because that requires us to skew it to the 30 and 40% of the area median income. So we're here trying to put together a public-private partnership, again, with the state and the city and us, to make the best use of the building, given what's there today and the funds that are available today.
One of the Achilles heels to this project for years has been that $5 million debt that's on it now. Is that to assume that, it's like you're saying you're buying that building for $5 million, and that's what and then you gotta turn around and put all this other money into it, it drives the cost so high. If you would have truly buy that building at truly what the market price is, it'd be less than the 5 million. And that's the problem, is you're overpaying up front, and you gotta try to take that money into account. And that's where Sam Estep had troubles and everyone else making it work, is that it's just, there's too much on it. And unless the bank takes a haircut, or Mark Romer takes a haircut and everything else, and reduced rates, it just isn't feasible. It sounds like I'm promoting it, and I don't like any more market rate, or I want market rate housing also, but that's the problem with this building, is that the biggest thing is that starting off, right off the bat, a $5 million debt.
We believe our structure that we've laid out addresses everybody's concerns. It meets the rules at the state level, both the affordable housing, the state ARPA funds, the state historic tax credit. It meets the federal affordable housing tax credit. It meets the state and federal historic credits. It addresses the bank's position. It addresses Mark's position, and it gives the city and us an asset that is the best we can do with what we have.
So, and maybe you've already discussed this, and I was just thinking about something else, but you're gonna start, you plan everything, providing everything goes as we all would like it to go. Your start of the rehab, you say it's gonna be 2024?
Yes,
What's the completion date on that? What's the timeline on it? Do you have one, or do you know?
I believe we would start if we, thinking out loud, walking through what I've talked to you about, the city owns it for 6 months, so we submit for the state historic tax credit this fall. At the same time, we'd secure our affordable housing tax credits, our ARPA funds from the state. We'd get our syndication of the historic credits on the federal side. We'd have our permanent lender in place so that we could start construction as soon as that historic tax credit would be approved, which would be about a year from now. And then we would start construction in earnest almost imminently after that, immediately after that. Be finished on or about the end of next year, end of '24. And then we'd be leasing up, say, the spring of '25.
Providing all inspections and everything go where at, right? You're hoping to have tenants in there by the end of next year?
Or early '25, spring of '25.
Okay, thank you.
Chris, I'm sorry, did you have 3 minutes?
Yeah, I just had another.
Go ahead.
I forget.
Okay, I'll ask and then she'll remember. So, you guys have just done some work, right? You were telling me you just put in, I don't know, was it you or Mr. Romer? Who put in the recent money, I guess?
I need to clarify that. That is not us.
Right.
That's one of the things that we talked to Mr. Romer about. In order to get him to his price, he needed to do some work to stabilize the building, and he did that. So Mr. Romer hired Door Creek Construction, which happens to be the general contractor that we will use. But the work was done by Door Creek at the direction of Mr. Romer, not us.
Okay, none of this was funded by you guys?
This was funded by Mr. Romer.
Okay, thank you.
So, how much did we pay Mark Romer out of the TIF? We have that exact number? I know we asked that before.
Well, it's more. I brought the hard numbers today instead of just relying on my faulty memory. But we had agreed, and this was our agreement that started in 2013. So $1,420,000 to be paid in 4 disbursements of $355,000 to be paid on January 15th as the calendar ticked over. We paid 2 of those disbursements out, 2 of $355,000 to Mr. Romer, so
710?
a little bit of money. In our agreement, we had also offered $75,000 to help with installation of new sidewalks on 3 sides of the building, and $100,000 to go towards the restoration of the Chief Blackhawk mural on the north face of the building. So that was kind of where we.
You
That
said
too?
we
No,
offered.
those
Just
were
offered.
offered, those had not been paid out, and the last 2 payments to Mr. Romer had not been paid
The
out.
cash paid for this, from the city to him is the 710,000.
Correct. Correct. And, I mean, you did see there is some work that has been completed in those rooms, in the building itself. So, I mean, we can say that the city has made an investment in that property already, right? We'll say that. Darn, it's my fault. Sorry, Tim. You know, and I would like to say, I've spent a lot of mental anguish in this building, in the papers to deal with this building. The proposal we received 10 years ago is certainly different than the proposal we're receiving from Mr. Ailes and his partners. But what the city had to offer 10 years ago is also much different than what the city has to offer today, with the ending of the downtown TIF and, you know, other sorts of opportunities that may have been available to us in 2013 are no longer available in 2023. So that's one thing I keep telling myself as I consider this proposal from Mr. Ailes and as we're looking towards different opportunities for assistance. You know, it's a different project than what we had originally been offered. Doesn't mean that it's bad, it's just different, and I think we need to remember on both ends, we're in a different situation. So.
Oh, no, I have questions for Mr. Ailes. Okay, so are there application deadlines for the low-income tax housing credits for the Ida ARPA funds, for, you keep mentioning are there state and federal historic tax credits?
Yes, there are.
Yeah, okay.
And that is the real deadline that's driving us today. That is the competitive piece of the funding that we are focused on. The affordable housing tax credit, because we've chosen to use the 4% instead of the 9% program, is an open round, and it's non-competitive. We meet the rules, we're entitled to those funds. The federal historic tax credit, we meet the National Park Service standards, we're entitled to that tax credit, and all we have to do is place the credit. It's the state historic tax credit that will be competitive, that has a deadline, and by the city owning it for 6 months, while you're trying to help us with some parking issues, we achieve the ancillary benefit of earning 1 extra point out of 5 points that are available in that state historic tax credit scoring program. That answer your question?
That law runs out at the end of this year and may or may not be renewed.
Okay, so, I'm not as familiar with all these programs, although I've had dealt with them in the past. So, the LIHTC, low-income
Housing tax credit.
housing tax credit, that's an open,
Yeah, there are 2 different prongs, if you will, to the, I'll call it the Section 42 Affordable Housing Tax Credit.
right?
The 9% program is competitive and has a set cycle. The 4% is non-competitive, and that's the program that we'd be pursuing.
And can you explain what that means?
Under the 9% program, there are set deadlines to submit your application, and you compete with other developers across the state.
Right.
IDA will award the credits based upon those
Right.
developments that have the highest score.
Right.
Very similar to what's happening with the state historic tax credit. We have
Right.
to compete with other developers across the state. and they will award the state historic tax credit to those that have the highest score. Just a little simpler scoring on the state historic tax credit, and we have a leg up because we know we get 4 out of the 5 points. And I could go through them if I needed to. They'd probably come back to me, but we get 4 out of the 5, and the 5th one is if the city owns the building for 6 months.
And can you explain that part of it, though? So why did he, I'm just curious, like, why is that part of the thing that the,
You'd have to ask your legislators that.
oh, okay, that just, I've never heard that one before.
Yeah, one of
So-
them is that you have to be adjacent to a state that offers a historic tax credit, and we are, Iowa does. And I can't remember the other 3, but I know we meet them. I think it has to be in a QCT, and there's a couple others.
Okay,
Alderperson Gilbert, I think that rule about if it's publicly owned was included for our beloved county courthouse, honestly. They included that because of the effort to try to preserve the county courthouse.
oh, well, okay.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. As the wrecking ball gets closer and closer to that building.
And the IDA ARPA funds, is that a competitive process?
Yeah, I'd have to defer to my partner, Jim Bergman. He's worked with IDA 20 years, has a very good rapport with them, and he's handling that part of the project, and he's confident that we can access those funds.
My question is, if we say, let's go ahead and go forward and get some more information, what obligation does that put us?
None? Time, just,
At least we would get some information to be able to answer some more of the questions that we may not even think of right now. And that's kind of what I'm thinking, and I appreciate all of the questions because we're trying to do our due diligence so that we, as city council, don't take a haircut.
You don't need a haircut.
I do.
but that's exactly right. At this point, the overall question is the city council okay with city staff spending time, continue to dive into these questions and get answers? If you want to call it negotiating a contract or an issue, but getting it closer to that point. So if the council then get updated with that information and be able to make a decision because of the timing issue of it that needs to be happening. We need to be kind of working, if you want to call it, in concurrence together with that so we can meet the timing of this.
Then we may need to put other projects on the back burner because if we're on a time crunch,
No, I can't speak for staff, but I don't think so.
Not really.
I don't think so.
So, as Mr. Ailes mentioned, we've actually been discussing this with him on a preliminary basis for about a year now. So we have been having some looser conversations for a long time internally. I would point out the entire CED management team is here because we too have been debating the merits of a project like this internally for about that long. The same sorts of questions that the council is asking are questions that we have been asking as well. Again, as Tara, I think, very astutely put it, we only have so much buying power to get a certain type of product. Okay, so that's a way to think about this project. In terms of where it falls into our priorities, quite frankly, it's a big property in the middle of our downtown. That it has sat blighted and incomplete for a decade has had a significant detrimental impact on our community image as well as our tax base. And so if the council would like staff to continue to get deeper into the weeds with Mr. Ailes and his partner about how this project would work with legal to answer some of the more nuanced questions of our agreements, we would consider this a high priority project. And we would make sure that it moved through things with due diligence.
I would only be comfortable with that if we as council were assured that this is not an obligation or a commitment on our part at this point.
Been stated and on the record, so.
Yeah, you won't have any obligation or commitment until you approve an agreement.
Okay, I have one more question for Mr. Ailes. So the ownership entity, after we're done with it and it passes to you, is it a for-profit or a nonprofit?
The for-profit, it would be an LLC or a limited partnership, one of the two, that would have, and this is going to get technical on you, a 99.9% partner who is the investor effectively purchasing the federal affordable housing tax credit and the historic tax credits. It's a mechanism that's standard in the industry. They're 99.9% because then they get 99.9% of the tax credits, but they are a limited, non-voting partner. We're the managing member.
Right. So, and you would be paying property taxes?
Yes.
And are you aware of our new SSA tax too?
I became aware of that at our last walkthrough, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think this is a great project. I really appreciate the time that you have spent this past year working with staff, working with your partners, working with everybody to stitch this together. It's a complicated project, and you know, for all of this soft costs, you haven't gotten paid for any of it, right? So I appreciate the time and effort and money, frankly, that you've invested in the property already, taking time to show us both the call building and this one tonight. It's appreciated, and moving forward, you have my support.
I would like to say that I liked going through both properties across the river as well as this, and I thought you seemed to be very well prepared and versed, and to me, you've answered all the questions I've had to this point, and so I'm probably with Alderman Parker here, and thumbs up for me to move forward too.
Any other council members?
Well, I just want to say, because I asked for this data back on July 25th, I've asked for it since then, I've asked for it this week too. I want more detailed data, more than what's in this report we got at the last minute this afternoon, on the housing that we have in our downtown. Because if we're going to try and attract retail, and nobody's ever been able to really answer the question, and I don't want just census tract data. We know what the properties are, you know, how many of them are low income, or, you know, are they the 30%? I don't even know what Spencer Towers is, but I know that's like the biggest property downtown. I want to have the detailed data on that kind of information, so we know what we have downtown. I mean, half the properties that are owned downtown, they're our partners, so I would think they would be, I would hope that they'd be willing to share that data with us.
Are you okay with staff continuing to dive into details?
I think they're two separate issues. Yeah.
No commitment, obviously getting that data, but if they're okay continuing to
Yeah.
work on this project?
Well, I really want the data. I mean, I don't know what it takes. I mean, I started asking for it last July.
Mr. Healy?
I am for it, absolutely. It's a catch-22. I personally I want market rate housing, but I don't want a mothball project, you know? I mean, it's catch-22.
Or worst case,
Yeah.
and I can tell you, in our experience, with a portfolio of our group of over 4,000 or 5,000 apartments, those apartments, after we're done and we're operating a property that are at the 30 and 40% of the area median income, are the easiest to rent, you can imagine.
Oh, I'm sure.
That would make our job easier in many respects, to take this money from the call to action and proceed with this project without the money from the city and just do it with 30 and 40% AMI units. But I don't want to do that, and I don't think you want to do that. So that's why we've spent the time to do what we've done. And you're right, and I thank you for recognizing that we are out of pocket a substantial sum of money with all the soft costs that we've incurred, not the least of which is our architect, who's done a lot of work on the plans.
So that 60% that will stay that, right? You're not gonna come back and go, it's something different, so, okay. I,
Because that financing is tied to that.
yeah, so not everyone here went to your other project over there, but, and I thought everything over there looked great, and I don't know, I think your team really has their stuff together, so.
Okay. And Mark, you're okay?
I gave the thumbs up, but for the record, for the recording, yes.
Do thank you. I mean, it's tough to stand up there and answer all these questions, so I do honestly appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you understanding that. It is my job.
Well, yeah, and it's a difficult project because there's been so much debt taken on to try and get this, I mean, we've been through how many incarnations of this? Yeah.
We don't need that building sitting down there for another 10 years, just completely falling apart, so.
It'll be longer than 10.
Well, I know, yes, for sure. Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I need a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and second. Roll call, please.
Alderperson Parker?
Aye.
Aye.
Healy?
Aye.
Hurt?
Aye.